Today I'm showing you how I do mini landscape studies with markers, and I love the simplicity of them. If you've seen me do marker art before, you'll know that I don't do any blending at all really. Markers have actually really helped me with my painting approach, but I'll tell you more about that later. So I'm going to show you how to do 4 quick and pretty simple landscape studies with markers, and I'll link the references I used to inspire these 4 studies below if you want to follow along. So I'm starting with this snowy mountain scene, which I think is one of the easiest because I really let the white of the page do the heavy lifting. For this study, I mainly use 3 different shades of greyish blue, and I start by mapping out where the shadows are on the mountain, and I'll double and triple layer the same marker colour to deepen it. And I make sure that I'm conscious of the negative space on the page because I'm using the white of the page as the lightest snow. So I want to be strategic in the way that I put down my strokes of marker and the shapes I'm making. Now I'm going in with a slightly darker shade of blue to deepen some of the shadows on the mountain. And I also use my fine line pen to add those rocky bits that poke through the snow. You can see already with just 2 colours and the pen, it's looking quite dimensional. With the sky, I'm using a really light grey and being mindful of the shapes I'm putting down to give the illusion of clouds. And I'm being really light with my strokes and then mixing in a bit of blue at the top where the sky is poking through. Then I realised I had to deepen some of the mountain shadows, and I used the same blue to just layer over it and darken some of those areas. And then I layered some of the light blue over the grey to give a bit more dimension to the clouds. And here is the final result, and as you can see it was done with very few colours and no blending, but I think the overall look is really satisfying. For the second landscape, I'm doing some rolling grassy hills with some trees, and I want to give the illusion of depth, of the hills in the distance looking like they're off into the distance, and for the foreground to look closer to us. So for that to happen, I want my background to be lighter in value and more blue toned. So I start with a lightish blue and I layer a light green over it to give that kind of bluey green tone. And then for the foreground, I begin with a yellow for the lightest areas of the grass, and I always tend to go from light to dark with markers. There's a few exceptions, but generally you want to stick to that order as you can't go back in with light colours over dark, so you have to play with the negative space a lot. I then start laying down a mid-tone green, and I keep my strokes light and going in one direction following the shape of the hills. I then start layering that same green over the top just to darken a few areas. And then I start layering an even darker green on top of that. For the mid-ground, so that hill that's in the middle, I go in with the same mid-tone green, but then I cover it with a bluish green on top so it gets that hint of blue, which makes it look like it's more in the distance, but not quite as far as that last hill in the distance. I then go in with a dark turquoise green to cover all the pine trees, and the fine tip end of the marker is really useful because they're so tiny. I then add a darker shade of green to create some depth and shadow on the trees that are closer to us. And then I use the same green to do some of those foreground grass blades. And I'm adding a variety of those green shades that I've used to create depth in the foreground grass. And then I finish off with some pen to add some detail. So making sure that things that are closer to you in the landscape have more detail, so it brings it right to the foreground. And for the sky, I'm keeping it super simple with some light lines in blue and letting the white come through of the page to give it that kind of wispy cloud appearance. Then I add just a few more shadows on those trees to give a bit more depth. And here is the super simple rolling hills landscape. Okay, so this third landscape is one of my favorites. It's an autumnal leafy scene, and this one took a bit longer because there's a few more layers to it, but I promise it's just as easy and that you can do it too as well. It just takes a bit longer. Okay, so I'm building this one from back to front, starting with the lightest color in the background, this light yellow, and I put it all over where it needs to be. Then I fill the background trees with a slightly darker shade of yellow, and I begin to add my first layer of leaves with this yellow with little dashes and dots. Then I use a sunflower yellow to add my next layer of leaves. And I'm just putting this everywhere where I can see this color come through. It looks a bit messy initially because you're kind of putting it in random areas, but trust the process. Then with the light brown, I begin to add some of the tree trunks, and I don't do straight joined up lines. I make sure to leave some gaps, as this gives the illusion that some of those leaves are in the foreground. And this is the thing with markers, you have to layer very strategically and play with negative space a lot, seeing as the light colors don't show up over dark colors. Then with the dark brown, I start adding some of those foreground trees, and you can see how this really begins to add depth and perspective. And I layer the same brown a few times to darken the tree trunk. I'm then using some Ohuhu fine liners for those really tiny details, and these are from a set of multiple colors which are super useful for my marker illustrations, so I was really excited to use them. So thanks Ohuhu for sending these and for sponsoring this video. I felt like I wanted to darken those tree trunks even more, so I layered a dark grey over the top of the brown, and this is a trick you can use to kind of darken colours, as long as they aren't super different in value. Layering a dark grey over a dark colour often just makes it darker and not necessarily grey looking. And this is the final result, and I love how this one came out so much. I think the layers really helped to add a lot of depth to this one. So for the final mini landscape, I wanted to do some water, so I adapted the reference photo and I simplified it quite a lot. And I mentioned earlier how I feel like alcohol markers have really helped my approach with painting. And I think it's because it's helped me simplify my approach a lot more. Like, I have a limited amount of colors and I don't really do much mixing or blending. So I have to figure out how I can achieve a certain effect with only a few colors and using my marks strategically on the page. So this has really helped me be a lot more aware of this with painting as well. So as you can see here, I've started with a blue and I'm doing some light marks across the page, letting the white come through, and then using a darker blue to create some of those ripple lines in the water. Then with the trees, I wanted to create that effect of depth again and have those trees in the background look further away. So I kept those in light green and added darker green to the trees that are closer to me, and more shadow and detail in the foreground to keep that perspective again. Now, similarly with the background mountains to appear far away, like I did with the other landscape, I add a layer of blue with a light green on top to get that bluey green effect that appears less saturated and therefore more far away. And with that second mountain, I did the same, but just intensified the blue a bit more, so it was a bit more saturated and therefore appeared a little bit closer. Then for the sky, I'm sticking to one color, but varying the pressure and allowing the white of the page to come through adds some like texture and a bit of kind of wispy clouds again. And it's super simple, but it really does create a cool effect and you don't need loads of colors to do this. Then I add some final details with the pen, just picking out some of those tree details. And this is the final result of all 4 landscapes. I hope you enjoyed following along, and please do tag me if you do these yourself. I love seeing what you create, and I think these are great to do if you're new with markers. I hope I've conveyed how simple it is to do this approach, but do feel free to ask me any questions in the comments. I'll see you in my next video, and I promise I won't take ages to upload my next video. I took a bit of an unforeseen break, but I'm back now, and I'll see you next time. Bye!